Good morning, students. Today's topic is on limbic system. Learning objectives are listing the components of limbic system and components and functions of Papez circuit and outlining the distribution and functions of different mesocortical neurotransmitter systems and describing the functions of limbic system and the structures and neurotransmitters of reward system, the neural components of avoidance system, and describe the physiology of motivation, addiction, fear, anxiety, rage, and placidity, and the role of limbic system in emotional responses, and understanding the physiological basis of abnormalities of limbic functions, especially the Kluver-Bucy syndrome. Okay. Coming to the definition of limbic system. The word limbic means border, girdle, ring or belt. Okay, so its meaning is a border or girdle or ring or belt. In 1878, Paul Broca introduced limbic system, a series of structures on the inferomedial surface of cerebral hemisphere, which borders the junction between diencephalon and telencephalon. Okay, so Paul Broca, scientist, introduced the term limbic system, and which consists of a series of structures on the inferomedial. Okay, so inferomedial is inside, inferior surface and medial side of the cerebral hemisphere, which borders the junction between diencephalon and telencephalon. And limbic system forms the advanced part of the primitive brain. Recently, limbic system is considered as the entire neuronal circuitry that controls emotional behavior and motivational drive. Okay, so this is the recent study that limbic system controls the emotional behavior and motivational drive of an individual. Phylogenetically, limbic system is the oldest part of cortical and subcortical areas of the brain that mainly controls the emotional responses and visceral functions. So the study of limbic system is a challenging task because of its complex internal connections. So it is having internal connections, that is connections within the components of limbic system and multiple neuronal networks. Okay, so this limbic system has multiple neuronal networks and neurotransmitter systems, and its intricate and extensive connections with various parts of CNS. So also having connections within its components and also extensive connections with various parts of. So because of these various connections, study of this physiology of limbic system is little bit challenging. And scientists contributed to the limbic system are James Papez, was an American neurologist and neuroanatomist who is famous for 1937 description of the Papez circuit. So it is a neural pathway in the brain which is thought to be involved in cortical control of emotions. He proposed that circuit connecting the hypothalamus to the limbic lobe was the basis for emotional experiences. And P.D. McLean redefined the circuit as visceral brain, which consisted of the limbic lobe and its major connections in the forebrain, hypothalamus, amygdala, and septum. Okay, so McLean redefined the circuit as the visceral brain. And James Papez is a neuroanatomist famous for the description of Papez circuit. So these two words you can remember because they may come as MCQs. And next, classification of structures of limbic system. So the limbic system is composed of cortical and subcortical structures. Okay, so the main cortical structures are the limbic lobe and hippocampal formation. So limbic lobe and hippocampal formation are the cortical structures, and subcortical structures are amygdaloid nuclear complex, and then hypothalamus, olfactory areas, septal nuclei, anterior nucleus of thalamus. Okay, so how these are arranged we will see now. So this picture shows the parts of the limbic system. So as we know that limbic means a circle or limb or a girdle or border like thing. So in this we have the cortical structures, limbic lobe and hippocampal formation, and then these are the subcortical structures. The main one is hypothalamus, anterior nucleus of thalamus, septal nuclei, paraolfactory areas, amygdala, and portions of basal ganglia and hippocampus. Okay, so cortical and subcortical structures. So this is also again the same picture of limbic structures. Coming to the connections of limbic system, it forms a link between the brainstem and the neocortex. So rich connections are present between the limbic structures, that is within the limbic system, with each other, and then limbic structures with association cortex, and then limbic structures with the brainstem. Okay, so these three types of connections are present in the limbic system. So first one we will see Papez circuit. So this is most important topic, Papez circuit. It will come as a short question or a very short question for you. So how it is formed, Papez circuit? So it is formed between anterior nucleus of thalamus, cingulate gyrus, hippocampus, and then the fornix, mammillary body, and then it is interconnected again to the anterior nucleus of thalamus. Okay, so see the Papez circuit again. Anterior nucleus of thalamus, cingulate gyrus, hippocampus, mammillary body, and mammillary body is connected with other parts of hypothalamus also. So this through fornix again connected to hippocampus, and the prefrontal cortex which is involved in motivation through the connections to cingulate gyrus and then hippocampus like this. And memory is involved connected memory function is involved both with the prefrontal and hippocampus. And here brainstem nuclei is also having connections with the hypothalamus. So mammillary body is connected with anterior thalamus through mammillothalamic tract. So this entire thing forms the Papez circuit. So the importance of Papez circuit is it plays an important role in short-term memory, that is recent memory. And repetition or rehearsal is the mother of learning. It is brought by reverberation done by Papez circuit. So reverberating circuits, we have seen this in the properties of synapses. So after discharge and reverberation, okay, so this repetition or rehearsal, which is mother of learning, is brought by reverberation done by Papez circuit. So in the previous slide we have seen no Papez circuit. So the connections are going on between the parts of the limbic system within itself. Again and again the connections are going. So that is reverberating. It converts short-term memory into long-term memory. That is called consolidation of memory. So for consolidating, repetition or rehearsal is very important, which is done by reverberation in the Papez circuit. So next one is median forebrain bundle, which is a major efferent connections. Okay, so after Papez circuit, the next one is median forebrain bundle, which is a major efferent connection from limbic structures to lateral and posterior part of hypothalamus. Okay, so this is to the hypothalamus. So orbitofrontal cortex and medial nuclei of thalamus and the other limbic structures. So these will be giving efferents to lateral and posterior part of hypothalamus, and which again sends fibers to the reticular formation of midbrain. So descending reticular tracts. So this is one circuit which is important for genesis of emotions and autonomic changes associated with emotions. Inner body functions are altered. So this medial forebrain bundle is important for the genesis of emotions and autonomic changes associated with emotions. So suppose the person is feeling happy. So in happy moment, some people will get tears. So that is the autonomic change associated with happy emotion. So like that, some autonomic changes are associated with the emotions. So those are also mediated by the medial forebrain bundle. And then the connections of amygdala with hypothalamus. From limbic cortex, neocortex of temporal, parietal and occipital lobes, especially auditory and visual association areas, send fibers to amygdala. And from amygdala, efferents are sent to via stria terminalis and ventral amygdala fugal fibers to the septal nuclei and then to the hypothalamus arcuate nuclei. And then the connections of amygdala with smell pathway. Uncus and entorhinal area of piriform cortex sends fibers to amygdala, which induces feeding and drinking behavior in animals and induces movements associated with olfaction and eating, such as licking, chewing and swallowing. So this amygdala connections with smell pathway in this so uncus and entorhinal area are the parts of the limbic system, so which send information or fibers to amygdala, which induces feeding and drinking behavior, and it also induces movements associated with olfaction and eating, such as licking, chewing and swallowing. And stimulation of amygdala induces certain emotions like fear, rage, escape, punishment and pain. In higher animals, the basolateral nuclei of amygdala has multiple connections, hence called window or biological filter, where filtering of events occur. Okay, so it enables one to see his own place or status in relation to outer environment and thought. And behavioral awareness area. It helps to pattern the person's behavioral response so that it is appropriate for each occasion. Okay, so this behavioral awareness area means pattern the person's behavioral response so that it is appropriate for each occasion the behavior of person will change according to the environment or with whom he is present. So that is behavioral awareness. And then limbic centers have connections with basal ganglia, which sends again the connections to reticular formation. So this is important in producing the external manifestations of emotions, nothing but expressions. Okay, so many of us, while showing our emotion, our facial expression automatically changes. So mainly the somatic responses like facial expression and other body gestures also in response to various emotions. So this is with connections by limbic centers, basal ganglia and reticular formation. Now coming to the various aminergic and cholinergic systems in the brain. So the major fiber systems in brain connecting various parts with each other are major monoaminergic and cholinergic fibers. So monoaminergic fibers are usually catecholinergic, that is noradrenergic, adrenergic and dopaminergic, and then serotonergic and then histaminergic fibers. And neurons projecting from reticular formation innervate almost all parts of CNS. And these projecting fibers are mostly axons of monoaminergic neurons. So neurons projecting from reticular formation innervate all parts of CNS, and these are mostly the axons of monoaminergic neurons. The limbic system and basal ganglia are richly innervated by these neurons. Okay, so these limbic system and basal ganglia are richly innervated by the monoaminergic neurons. So in the limbic system, monoaminergic neurons play a major role in determining emotional and other behavioral responses. So this is our main concept. So limbic system is concerned with emotions and other behavioral responses. The major dopaminergic systems are mesolimbic or mesocortical system. So this one, and tuberoinfundibular system. So this one, tuberoinfundibular system and nigrostriatal system. Okay, so this one, nigrostriatal system, and then insertohypothalamic system. Okay, so hypothalamus here. So this one, hypothalamic system. So this mesolimbic or mesocortical system is concerned with the motivation and drives of the person, and tuberoinfundibular system is concerned with the secretion of hypothalamic releasing factors into a portal system. Especially it inhibits the prolactin secretion. Okay, it controls the secretion of hypothalamic releasing factors into a portal system. And nigrostriatal system, this is essential for maintaining normal muscle tone, posture and voluntary movements. Okay, so this one you have seen in basal ganglia. So it controls or it maintains the normal muscle tone, posture and voluntary movements. And inserto-hypothalamic, it connects zona incerta of lateral septum with the hypothalamus. And it is involved in motivation and ingestive behavior of the person. So the next one is noradrenergic system. Here the neurons secrete norepinephrine as the name. These neurons are mainly located in the locus coeruleus, subcoeruleus and other brainstem nuclei. So two major noradrenergic systems have been described. So one is locus coeruleus system. So here locus coeruleus system. So this one red color, and other one is tegmental or ventral tegmental system. So this is present here, ventral tegmental system. So locus coeruleus system is involved in modulation of sensory and motor functions. So locus coeruleus is involved in modulation of sensory and motor functions and influences the cardiovascular regulation and other autonomic functions. And then the tegmental system, so it controls the hypothalamic secretion that in turn regulates hypophysiotropic secretion. So these control cardiovascular and respiratory functions also. So this noradrenergic transmission controls the mood and behavioral functions of the individual. Next one, adrenergic system. The cell bodies of neurons secreting epinephrine are located in the medulla and project to the spinal cord, hypothalamus, thalamus and periaqueductal gray matter. And the exact role of these neurons is not known. In serotonergic system, cell bodies of serotonergic neurons are located in the midline raphe nucleus of brainstem. So the fibers project to the spinal cord, hypothalamus, limbic system, neocortex and cerebellum. Serotonin is an important mood elevator. Serotonin suppresses sleep. So this we have seen in the previous class also. Serotonin suppresses sleep and it produces awakeness of the individual. Serotonin neurons are most active during awake state and least active during slow wave sleep. Serotonin also stimulates prolactin secretion. Okay, so it stimulates prolactin secretion, inhibits pain transmission in the dorsal horn of spinal cord and controls circadian rhythm by influencing function of suprachiasmatic nucleus. So serotonin has these many functions. You remember these because all these will come as MCQs. It suppresses sleep and it stimulates prolactin secretion, inhibits pain transmission and it controls circadian rhythm. Okay, and it is an important mood elevator. So serotonergic systems in the brain. Mesocortical pathway, raphe nucleus and raphe spinal pathway. And then histaminergic system. Cell bodies of histaminergic neurons are located in tuberomammillary nucleus of posterior hypothalamus. Okay, so hypothalamus is having again different nuclei in the tuberomammillary nucleus. The fibers project to olfactory bulb and all parts of the cortex. Histamine is proposed to be involved in regulation of limbic functions and especially in arousal and sexual behavior, regulation of blood pressure, water intake, pain and anterior pituitary secretion. Recently, it has been observed that histamine released from posterior hypothalamus inhibits thalamocortical projection, neurons that induce sleep. Okay, so recently it has been observed that histamine released from posterior hypothalamus inhibits the thalamocortical projection neurons that induces the sleep. Okay, so it means it produces sleep. So in other words, it helps in the genesis of sleep. And then the cholinergic neurons are plentifully available in basal telecephalon, thalamus and cortex. Distribution of these neurons closely resemble to that of monoaminergic neurons. A major cholinergic system of neurons project to nucleus basalis of Maynard to amygdala and neocortex. Both nicotinic and muscarinic receptors are present in the brain. Cholinergic neurons are involved in many physiological functions such as learning, memory, motivation, perception, cognition, and REM sleep. So both nicotinic and muscarinic receptors are present, and these cholinergic neurons are involved in these functions. Okay, learning, memory, motivation, perception, cognition, and REM sleep. So muscarinic blockers produce hallucination. So nucleus basalis of Maynard, a major cholinergic system of neurons, projects from nucleus basalis of Maynard to amygdala and neocortex. So these are involved in the functions like learning, memory, motivation, perception, cognition, and REM sleep. So this is again the basal forebrain or nuclei that includes nucleus basalis of Maynard and pedunculopontine nucleus. So this one. So the projections from the basal forebrain nuclei are the cholinergic neurons. So till now we have seen the various monoaminergic and cholinergic systems. So the neurons which are released from that systems, and then what are the functions of those systems. So I understood that it is all new to you, the terminologies. So don't worry about the terminologies, because again in anatomy, when the brain part comes, all these structures names will be coming to you in anatomy lectures. So don't worry about the names of the parts. So only worry about the functions. So in physiology, you should know the functions of each and every system. Okay. So in limbic system, so what I have told you, it is concerned with the emotions and the motivation of the person. Okay. So now we will see the functions of limbic system. So P.D. McLean in 1949 called the limbic system as the visceral brain. Okay, the visceral brain for its close association with hypothalamus and visceral autonomic functions. So it is primarily involved in motivation, addiction, emotions of fear, anxiety, rage and aggression, sexual activity and autonomic responses. So we will see these functions in detail. So first one is the genesis of emotions or generating emotions. So these emotions produce different types of behavior. That is the expression of emotions. These emotions has four characteristics. Okay, so one is cognition. That is the thinking process of brain which evaluates the stimulus. So cognition is thinking process of brain which evaluates the stimulus. And sensory information is compared with the stored information available by previous experience or inheritance. For example, seeing an object or a person and recognizing him. So already we have seen that person once or twice, and then now after seeing, the sensory information is compared with the stored information so that we can recognize that person. So this is the cognition part of the emotion. And then affect. Affect is feeling developed in relation to that stimulus. So after seeing the person, we will develop some feeling. So good or bad feeling. So that is the affect part. And then the conation or desire or urge to act. Okay. So you suppose if you had a happy feeling, the person is well known, he had done something good for you. So you had some urge to go and meet him, to talk to him. That is a conation part. And expression, that is the motor side of emotional behavior expressed in two ways. Okay, one is somatic and one is autonomic. So somatic is emotions expressed by gestures or facial expression, that is actual act performed. And then the autonomic part is sympathetic, increase in heart rate and blood pressure, and parasympathetic, decrease in heart rate and blood pressure. So all these will be present simultaneously when when one emotion is experienced by the individual, not one after the other. So first one is cognition, affect, conation, expression, Expression is of two types, somatic and autonomic. Okay, so facial expression is the somatic and any gestures, and autonomic is increase in heart rate and BP and or decrease in heart rate and BP. So these are the genesis of emotions. And other characteristics are emotions cannot be controlled by our will. That is, it is impossible to abolish them or to prevent them from not developing at all. Emotions last for much longer duration even after the stimulus is over. That is because of after discharge. This is because of space neuronal connections between the neocortex and allocortex. Okay, so these 2 points, remember, it cannot be controlled by our will and it lasts for much duration even after the stimulus is over. So all these things we have been experiencing in our daily lives. So how these emotions are generated means, depending on the sensory experience, limbic system interprets as pleasant or unpleasant experience. So neocortex translates pleasant experience as reward and unpleasant experience as punishment. So reward system or the center, it is located along the course of median forebrain bundle, especially in the lateral hypothalamus on mild stimulation, and also ventromedian nucleus of hypothalamus, septum pellucidum, amygdala, thalamus and basal ganglia extending down into the basal tegmentum. So all this is the course or the reward center where it is present. So nucleus accumbens is the main major reward center. Okay, nucleus accumbens is a major reward center in which dopamine is the major neurotransmitter for it. Okay, and then the punishment center, it is located in the lateral hypothalamus on strong stimulation. So on mild stimulation, lateral hypothalamus reward center, and on strong stimulation, lateral hypothalamus punishment center, and also the periventricular zones of hypothalamus and thalamus, periaqueductal gray matter of brain. And on stimulation of punishment center, it leads to emotional behavior patterns like rage, fear, anxiety, escape and escape tendencies. Okay, degree of stimulation of these two opposing systems affect the behavior of individual, that is provide background mood and motivations of the person. So the fear, rage and anxiety are located in the lateral hypothalamus on strong stimulation. So degree of stimulation of these two opposing systems, that is reward center and punishment center, affects the behavior of the individual. So limbic system by means of this reward and punishment system form the basis of learning and memory. So ability to learn, acquire knowledge requires limbic system. So from this we can say that the basis of learning and memory, main things are the reward and punishment system. So how we can explain this? So some people or some educated parents make their children to study, to remember things, or they will explain their children to study and remember. But some parents, some children, street children you can say, they are not at all interested in studying, going to school or college. So why all that happens? Because they are never exposed to reading and they never got any reward by reading and studying, remembering things. So that's why the main basis or main motivation for learning and memory is reward and punishment systems. So in your class also, you can if you have been observing from long time, so the first bench students, main studying students, so they will always have that motivation to read all the time. From where that comes? Because their reward system is always stimulated, they will keep on motivating themselves. So either their parents or their teachers, they will keep on motivating them or giving some reward, giving some interest to read. So that is the basis for learning and memory for everyone. Okay, so the major role is played by hippocampus and temporal limbic cortex and prefrontal cortex. So hippocampus is the major substance or the major part involved in learning and memory. Hippocampus determines whether the incoming signals are important or not. that is in critical decision making. It forms an important part. Selection of information is based on whether the stimulus or sensory experiences causes pleasure or pain. So that is the stimulation of reward or punishment center. So if the reward center is stimulated, so this is an experiment, that is Skinner box procedure. So in rats it has been done. So if the reward center is stimulated, animal continues to do it by repetition, and the response becomes stronger and stronger, leading to positive reinforcement. Okay, so this is if the reward center is stimulated. And suppose if punishment center is stimulated, animal avoids to do it and leading to negative reinforcement. So thus person learns the sensory experience. So if the animal is feeling happy, that is by rewarding, it goes on continues to do it by repetition, so that the response becomes stronger and stronger, leading to positive reinforcement. Okay, so it gets some as a experience from this. And also from this, if punishment is given, nobody wants to do it, so animals avoids to do it, so it leads to negative reinforcement. So the animal or a human being learns a sensory experience from reward or punishment. So if no reward or punishment centers are stimulated after sensory experience, then such indifferent stimuli leads to no learning. So the cause is cortical responses fades away after repetition due to habituation. So thus hippocampus provides a motivation or drive to remember those experiences or thoughts that are pleasant or unpleasant. So thus there occurs processing in hippocampus, and this information is committed to memory by various mechanisms like reverberating neuronal circuits, presynaptic facilitation, and presynaptic potentiation. So these are the mechanisms by which hippocampus stores the new information as short-term memory. Okay, so you can see here in the picture. So this is the presynaptic facilitation, one type, one mechanism of storing the memory, and then reverberating neuronal circuits, and also presynaptic potentiation. Another important function of hippocampus is consolidation, that is conversion of short-term to long-term memory. So hippocampus transmits some type of signals that makes the mind to rehearse the same information again and again. This potentiates and accelerates the transfer of short-term into long-term memory. So the cause for this is multiple physical and structural changes occurring in the synapses, that is DNA activation leading to increased synthesis of specific proteins. So physical and structural changes occurring in the synapses is the cause for conversion of short-term to long-term memory. So consolidation of memory and storage of short-term memory is the function of hippocampus. So remember all these points. This will come as short question or MCQs. So mechanism of this consolidation is increase in number of presynaptic transmitter vesicles, and increase in number of vesicular release sites, and increase in length of dendrites to accommodate extra synapses, and change in the structure of dendritic spines for transmitting stronger signals. So these are the four mechanisms. So amygdala is closely associated with hippocampus. It encodes emotional memories. Hence, the events associated with strong emotions are remembered better. Okay. Next, preservation of self or looking after yourself by drives and motivation. So drives are the ability to perform, and motivation is desire or urge to do. So the basic drives of life, that is hunger, thirst, and defense, are associated with emotions. Emotions for hunger, thirst are generated by limbic system. It also helps to execute or carry out these drives and motivations to satisfy these emotions. So preserving the self or the person itself, looking after yourself by the drives and motivation which are produced by the limbic system. So these are the basic drives of the human being, the hunger, thirst, and defense, so which are associated with emotions. For example, absence of food or water creates unpleasant feeling of deprivation. This motivates animal to find food, also helps in the act of finding food. So this shows the somatic responses. Limbic system controls dietary patterns, nutritional requirement of species. And lesions in amygdala, feeding habits will be changed, that is hyperphagia or herbivorous turning to carnivorous diet, like etc. And looking after self, for example, birds building the nest. So this limbic system controls the dietary patterns, nutritional requirement of species. So this is the for the basic drives of the human beings. So the motivation is getting from the limbic system. And then the preservation of species. Limbic system affects the sexual behavior. It is responsible for creating the sexual urge, pre-mating and its execution, mating, peculiar to species. In animals, sexual behavior is regulated by neural and endocrinal factors. In males, a neocortex initiates the sexual behavior. Anterior part of hypothalamus preoptic nucleus stimulates the sex behavior. And limbic areas like amygdala, frontal lobes and piriform cortex inhibit sexual behavior. In females, neocortex and limbic cortex increase sexual activity during heat or estrous cycle. Ovulation occurs during estrous cycle. So that during when the actual sexual activity is taking place, so that if the ovulation takes place, the animals can conceive, so it will be helping in preservation of species. Anterior hypothalamus preoptic nucleus increase sexual behavior. Pheromones or pheromones produced in vaginal secretion act via olfactory vomeronasal organ, thus regulates the sexual behavior. And looking after young ones, that is rearing of young. The maternal and paternal behavior is controlled by limbic cortex, and which is also based on the stimulation of reward center. And then instincts and instinctual behavior is inborn ability passed on generation to generation. It has genetic base. Okay, some instincts are present in some families. So those are passed down from generation to generation. So the natural tendency to behave in certain way without reasoning or training, innate impulse or intuition. Example, birds learn to fly by instinct. So birds migrate to lake, ponds where they are born. So these instinctive behavior patterns are specific to a particular species. So migration of Arctic turks from North Pole to South Pole. So like this, so certain behavioral patterns are specific to certain species. And next function is visual comprehension and recognition part of the limbic system. And other function is biological rhythms. So life cycle of an individual starts from infancy, childhood, puberty and adult, that is the stage of maintenance, and old age and senility. So circadian rhythm, day and night rhythm, wake and awake state, governed by the limbic system. And then lastly, primitive function of limbic system is perception of sense of olfaction or smell. So this is the primitive function of the limbic system. So perception of olfaction or sense of smell. So we have seen the various functions of limbic system. So now we will see the disorders affecting the limbic system. Alterations in the brain's monoaminergic system resulting in neurochemical imbalance in catecholamines, acetylcholine and serotonin have been observed in major psychiatric disorders, including the affective disorders and schizophrenia. Therefore, the most effective drugs used in treating psychiatric disorders are agents that alter the monoaminergic transmission. So, in these disorders, what is happening? There is a imbalance, neurochemical imbalance in the catecholamines, acetylcholine and serotonin. So these are observed in the affective disorders and schizophrenia. So most effective drugs used in this psychiatric disorders are the agents that alter this neurochemicals, that is the monoaminergic transmission. So the types of limbic dysfunctions are affective disorders and schizophrenia. So the affective disorders include depression, which most of us usually face many times, and mania or manic depressive psychosis. Okay, and the schizophrenia, it refers to a group of closely related psychotic disorders characterized by a particular type of disordered thinking, affect and behavior. The usual features are thought disorder, inappropriate emotional response, and auditory hallucination. So some type of auditory hallucinations will be present, and thought process. They will be thinking some wrong type of thinking. Some person is coming and trying to listen to what they are doing, trying to see what they are doing, like that. Some thought disorders will be present, and inappropriate emotional responses. They will respond in a different way to the persons. Okay, so this is disordered thinking, affect, and behavior are present in schizophrenia. So now we will see the physiology of emotion. Emotion is a state of feeling that manifests mentally and physically through cardiovascular and autonomic changes. So emotional activation and responses occur in three phases. Okay, stimulus recognition and evaluation, emotional responses, and emotional experience. So first we will see the stimulus recognition and evaluation. So first, the stimulus should be perceived, which is called recognition or the awareness of sensation. So the next step is stimulus evaluation. So the process by which the output is compared with stored information. The stored information is either available by experience or by inheritance. The knowledge and experience that are acquired are used for emotional expression. The inherited information also helps in emotional integration. For example, inherent fear in the monkeys for snakes. So like this some inherent fears will be present. No? So that is in emotional integration. It helps in the emotional integration. So first, recognition and stimulus evaluation is the first step in the emotions. So emotional responses has three components, as I have already told you in the previous slides: affect, conation, and physical changes. Affect is the feeling of emotion. Conation is the urge to take immediate action, and physical changes are the sympathetic effects like rise in heart rate, BP, respiration, and sweating. So these mainly depend on the type of the responses. So natural response, defense, and conditional response. So natural is the normal response of fear, anxiety, which are encountered in the daily life or the pleasure. And the natural stimulus for emotion involves in the neocortical perceive cognition mechanisms like non-emotional sensory process. And the natural response or natural emotion is associated with visceral and behavioral defects. And defense response is, as the name itself, it is a response for natural attack of responses to prevent from an attack. And conditional response is again, as the name suggests, it is a response attached to a conditioned stimulus. So if we give something, then only we will do the work. So like this, it is a conditional response. And after these emotional responses are produced, emotional experiences are stored effectively in the memory. So the subsequent emotional reactions to the similar stimuli mostly depend on the knowledge of previous experiences. So that is emotional experience. So how these emotional responses are controlled means through the neural control mechanisms like in the peripherally. So the pattern of autonomic activation depends on the, so the main output or the main pathway for emotional control of responses is autonomic nervous system, and the central area for the controlling emotions is again hypothalamus and limbic structures. So these are the centers which control the emotions. And lastly, the applied physiology related to limbic system. So in 1935, John Filton observed that frontal lobotomy in monkeys cures experimentally induced neurosis. Since then, selected lesions of brain, especially limbic areas, have been performed for the treatment of psychiatric disorders, which are popularly known as psychosurgery. Okay, so selected lesions of brain in the limbic areas have been performed for treatment of psychiatric disorders. So psychiatric disorders, as I have told you, that maniac depression and also schizophrenia, affective disorders and schizophrenia. So psychosurgery usually used for the treatment of psychiatric illness in which extremes of aggression is the main symptom. So we will see some types of emotional disturbances. So disturbances of emotion due to perception or cognition. Perception dysfunction, illusion, hallucination. and then cognitive disorders are delusion and disinhibition of emotional expression like emotional lability, pathological laughing and crying, enraged reaction and aggressiveness, apathy and placidity. So in this we have Kluver-Bucy syndrome and other syndromes, and altered sexuality, endogenous fear, anxiety, depression and euphoria. So out of all this big list, so we are only interested in this Kluver-Bucy syndrome. So it is an syndrome in which infection in the middle ear breaks into cranial cavity, leading to damage or removal of temporal lobe, loss of amygdaloid nucleus and hippocampus. So this is the cause for Kluver-Bucy syndrome. So infection in the middle ear breaking into the cranial cavity, leading to damage or removal of temporal lobe and loss of amygdaloid nucleus and hippocampus. So the features of this Kluver-Bucy syndrome are hypermetamorphia. So that is, animal extremely becomes restless, will not sit quietly, constantly moving around. In human, person will move around, examining all objects again and again. And oral tendencies, any object seen is taken and put into mouth. Animal then spits it out, repeats again the same procedure. Tameness and loss of all fear. Example, monkey holds snake and handles it. In normal animals, sight of snake causes alarm and avoids it. So this is the loss of all fear because of loss of the amygdaloid and hippocampus. Visual agnosia, that is loss of ability to recognize object by vision, and loss of ability to learn new things and loss of Papez circuit. Change in dietary habits, vegetarian becomes non-vegetarian, and animal eats anything that comes in its way even if it is dirty. So like that dietary habits will be changed, and hypersexuality so becomes so intense it does not distinguish between different species, and instinctual behavior completely changes. So these are the features of Kluver-Bucy syndrome. So this is also very important. It will come as a short question, or also these points will be asked as MCQs. Okay. So this is applied physiology of limbic system. So that's all for today's class. I hope you understood some part of the limbic system. So main thing for limbic system is the functions of limbic system is very important. So how the emotions are being generated, what are the components, and what are the controlling centers of emotions, and so mainly the components of limbic system also you should remember, and lastly the applied physiology part. So for today's assignment, take down the question, that is the components and functions of limbic system. So write down that part and then send to me to my Telegram number. And also prepare your own notes for all the nervous system because we have come to the end of the nervous system. So prepare notes for each and every topic of the nervous system and also special senses. So that's all. Thank you all.